Morning, everyone. If just while we're waiting, we'll give it a couple of minutes for people to come in and join the session. If you want to put your name in the chat and say where you're joining us from today while you're waiting, that would be great. And I will just say at the outset that if just because we have got the two functions, use the chat for saying hi and where you're from, and any comments for really specific questions, which no promises, but I am hoping to be able to pick up, and I'll certainly take away with me if I can't pick them up within the timing of the session. If you put those in the Q&A so that they're then a little bit separated, that would seem to make sense of these two functions. We'll keep waiting. Oh, from Dubai, Tarleton, which I don't know, but where that's from. Where Tarleton is, help me with my geographical knowledge. Essex. Isle of Wight. Oh, Lancashire. Lovely. Oh, great. And some local to me as well. Bedfordshire, Suffolk, Essex. I'm in Cambridge this morning. Oh, Kirsty from Cambridgeshire. Switzerland. Oh, and there's a place I'd like to be, slightly more than Cambridgeshire today. Great. Okay. We'll keep going for a couple of minutes because it does take a little bit of a while for people to come in. It's also not an exact science. We don't know exactly how many people will be coming in to join the session live compared to people who have paid to join the session but will be able to catch it up later. So we have to give it a couple of minutes because otherwise we really won't know. So I won't take too much longer, but just do come in and say hello to everybody. Oh, Cécile, bonjour. Brill, nice to know there's some people I know. Great. Okay, a couple more people coming in. We're gonna get started in a minute though, because otherwise they're really, oh Sam, hi. There really won't be enough chance to get through the session. Oh, Vincent, hello. Brilliant. Okay, right, I'm going to make a start, knowing that if people do trickle in late, they can also go back to the beginning if they want to, if they've missed a section. So just going to hide that chat for now. Right, so formal start to the session then. Hi, my name is Rachel Hawkes. I am currently joining two jobs together. I'm seconded from my school for quite a large part of my week at the moment to work as co-director at NSELP. And I continue to work one day a week for the CAM Academy Trust. And in this session, I'm going to talk about culture in the languages curriculum with examples of work from both of these roles, so both together. And I'm therefore not only presenting ideas of mine, but also the work of colleagues in the NSELP team and in my trust, so my colleagues that are in my department and others as well, as I'll explain. So before we get underway with that session, a big thank you to everybody whose ideas are represented in it. Okay, if we start really briefly then with 3 statements about culture in the languages curriculum, and I'll just let you read them as they come up. They're short statements and will be familiar to lots of you. Okay, so this final one, the content of the new language should be stimulating and widen knowledge of the culture, history, and literature of speakers of the new language without compromising the necessary sequencing of vocabulary and grammar. This one's given rise to concerns from quite a few people. And so I'm paraphrasing a question here, which sort of summarizes the basis for some of those concerns. And I've put that again at the top here. So I'm hearing this message a fair amount or similar messages to it. And yet I want to say that many words, in fact, the majority of the 2,000 most frequent words are really rich content words. And that one of the things I want to explore this morning is that if we build from those words, the contexts will come. And I think as well, because we're talking about culture, I'll do a quick just definition of what I think of as culture, because I do think that it's helpful to see the process of learning a new language itself as a step on our road towards intercultural competence. So thinking about what we mean by culture, I'm sure a lot of you have seen this. I've presented it before and others have too. If we understand culture as the whole system of attitudes and beliefs and values that sit under the water, the underwater part of the iceberg, and that those underpin the surface actions and habits and celebrations that we can see in everyday life, we can get this sense that not only are they inseparable, but that learning what we can see on the top might be a very useful way in the initial stages to understanding what we can't see so easily underneath. And just a quote from Claire Cramch here, to suggest that language itself is perhaps the most visible and accessible expression of culture. And so my starting point is that we find culture in language itself, that we find it in the sounds, we find it in the words, and we find it in the structures, the grammatical structures. And when we teach them, we lay the foundation for understanding other worldviews and for seeing ourselves through the eyes of others. Now, that sounds really nice, even sounds nice to me on a Saturday morning, but I do want to put that into some real context and show what I mean a little bit, because I think that even if we're starting at the very beginning of Key Stage 2, and I've taken a Year 3 resource here from our new French scheme of work for the CAM Trust, even with the most basic of vocabulary, there is still an open doorway to culture. So just really, really tiny examples that bit by bit all add up. This is a very small example of how words themselves, so the vocabulary, can carry culture. And just to explain that in this primary resource, in the scheme of work, we have cousins, we have a family in France and a family in Haiti. And this opens the way for all sorts of little cultural comparisons. And here, as we present the days of the week, we also introduce the idea of what is the first day of the week and how different countries perceive that differently. So you're going to hear Marie-Odile Guillou, who is the French voice and inspiration behind some of these resources. We're working on them together, presenting the days of the week as we all do at some point in our courses, whenever that may be. But adding a little bit of information here. So in France, first day of the week is Monday. The last day of the week is Sunday. We chug through the rest of the days of the week and we cut to, here we have Adèle saying a sentence.
Aujourd'hui, c'est lundi.
And then we'll get to dimanche eventually.
Dimanche.
And dimanche, of course, is the first day of the week in Haiti. And the last day of the week for them is Saturday. And obviously behind that sits some culture, sits some religious associations, but imagining our primary classrooms and actually the rich cultural heritages that we have often represented in one primary class, and just actually thinking of the extension there to find out from them and ask them in the moment which for them is the first day of the week, and seeing the variety and that we are not likely to be the same same in Britain in terms of how we think of the days of the week and how the days of the week start.
Aujourd'hui, c'est dimanche.
Anyway, these two characters have lots of interactions, obviously, and I'm just going to take it on a little bit because we then have another little cultural comparison that comes up later on in the lesson. So I'll go past this bit where we're revising the bits of être that we already know,
Tu
etc., etc. And we get to introducing c'est, which is part of what we're going to do in this lesson.
c'est.
Explaining what it means. And
C'est ici?
they have done questions before, so we're just looking at the question we're going to use
Oui,
this lesson.
c'est ici.
Okay, and then we go on, and this is the scenario that we have where we're going to put the language into this context. We don't have very much language yet. This is quite near the start of year 3. And there's this time difference, of course, between France and Haiti. And Pierre, who is Adèle's brother, he gets a little bit confused, and Jean-Michel gets a little bit cross at all these messages that he is receiving. So we can either click and listen, or we can listen to the whole dialogue at once. But we're going to fill in the gaps. First of all, after we've listened to the dialogue, we're filling them in to obviously practice the vocabulary. And all the while, this little mini story is building up, and we're thinking about why there would be this confusion over the different days. And eventually, obviously, we'll get to a little bit of cultural knowledge, a little bit of geographical knowledge, really, and world knowledge more than anything else. And I'm ashamed to say that I was probably an adult by the time I really realized that if you went left on the map, that always went backwards in time. And if you went right, that meant that you were going to go forwards. I'm ashamed to admit that, but that is indeed the case. So for Jean-Michel, it is 6 hours behind the time in France, and that's given rise to this story scenario. So it's small things. Let's jump forward though, because that was about vocabulary and bringing the culture out of vocabulary. Here we're going to try and bring the culture or cultural use out of the grammar feature. And so here we've got this is year 5, and Marie-Odile, who is my co-writer, as I've said, on this primary scheme of work, was really keen that pupils learn the typical French way to talk about dates. And she told me very firmly, this is how they're talked about in the classroom. In year 3, as you just saw, we talked about days with c'est, because pupils were gaining a lot of confidence with using the singular persons of être in various different contexts. But by year 5, pupils have learned plural forms of être as well. Nous sommes, vous êtes, ils sont, elles sont. And this therefore seemed like a very useful place in the sequence to introduce pupils to a more idiomatic way to talk about dates. So we do it after they already know nous sommes and after they already know quelle, because it's also a cross-linguistic difference. It's not a word-for-word translation. It's an idiomatic use. So quelle, revising that here, we've learnt it before. And
Nous sommes quel jour?
Oh, sorry to talk over you. Nous sommes quel jour? Which we translate literally because they know all of the parts. They can break this chunk down because all of those individual parts they have used in different contexts already. So thinking back here to the statement from the pedagogy review about teaching culture and complementing the grammar and vocabulary along the way. So weaving them in together, integrating them into a whole. Decisions like this are not cut and dried. They are subjective. They're about interpretation, but they're also about a rationale and informed decisions to achieve that balance that's always that always has the time limited classroom context very much in the forefront of our minds. So alerting them to the fact that although they can break this down for themselves, we also then need to give a little bit of extra information. So in English, we often say, what day is it? In French, we use nous sommes quel jour? They obviously already know how to do intonation questions, putting a question word at the end of a statement.
Quel?
They also know quel. the feminine form. We've practiced this before with different nouns, and here we're
Nous sommes quelle date?
practicing it again with the idiomatic use of nous sommes to talk about dates as well as days. So nous sommes quel jour, nous sommes quelle date. Again, the information comes, the reminder comes about quel. And so here, practicing that idiomatic use of nous sommes. How are we going to decide whether this statement is nous sommes quelle date or nous sommes quel jour? How could we possibly tell? Well, it all pivots around the spelling of quel, obviously, and the fact that pupils do know the gender of date and jour. So we're not playing with loads and loads of words here, but we are exploring this new use of nous sommes. We've already used it to say we are with various adjectives, and we've done adjectival agreement. This is building on the use, but building in idiomatic use of the language. Okay, so I've got two short Spanish examples here of resources, and I've taken a wide spread so that these two resources take the Day of the Dead as the learning context. It's a context that's familiar to most Spanish teachers, but the two lessons have different learning aims and involve different things to reflect the language level, the different language level of the learners. And first, this is a Year 5 lesson, again from our Trust, CAM Trust scheme of work. And here we're revising, first of all, some vocabulary from Year 3-4. We revise cuantos and cuantas. We revise plural adjectives that end in L, S, or Z as well. And we can't see the full lesson, but I'm just gonna, or you can see the full lesson on the website, but I'm just showing the start and how the week finishes up. So it will be this sequence. We introduce the vocabulary, we introduce the idea of the altar. The actual idea of the Day of the Dead and what it's for has been introduced in a previous lesson. And then after lots of listening and reading practice with the language, pupils then do a read aloud, they do a comprehension and draw their response to show their understanding. They then do some written sentences and have the opportunity to design and describe their own altar. So this is what that looks like. I'll run through it very quickly for timing purposes, but it's on the website. You can download
4.
and use.
Feliz, especial, la flor. Hay. 5. Importante. Son. 7. El festival. El ojo.
The reason that all of this is audioed is that we've got two versions of the resources to support non-specialist teachers who are delivering in primary that either want to prepare and practice and then deliver themselves, or who want to use this supported version in the lesson itself. The voice you heard there, Paula Vasquez Valero, is a colleague of mine at Combatin within the CAM Academy Trust, and she is the lead writer on the Spanish resources for primary. So here we elicit the Spanish, practicing recall as well as pronunciation, obviously, and basically to prime as well for the use of the language in the lesson. So here we introduce an altar with a little bit of new vocabulary. We don't take for granted that pupils will know what an altar is in English. So we give an explanation for that as well. And we introduce two words here. Calavera, actually, you won't be surprised to know, lies somewhat outside the top 5,000 words in terms of frequency, but no matter, because it is important to this cultural context. We won't necessarily be tracking it 17 times across the scheme of work, but we're certainly not going to shy away from introducing it and practicing it here.
La calavera, las flores, la foto, la vela.
I think that's a really important thing as well, to say that, you know, low frequency words with high cultural value should be included. And so we do that here.
En el altar hay 2 calaveras.
This is an elicitation exercise. They know the numbers already, of course, and they're using the information about that they can see there visually in order to.
En el altar hay 6 flores.
In order to read that sentence aloud. So moving on, we've done lots of cuantas activities by this stage. We've done more practice with the vocabulary, and we're going into a pair work where pupil A is going to correct the differences that they hear compared to what they're seeing when their partner reads out the text on the right-hand side aloud. So they're going to underline the differences. And of course, those who can will also transcribe what they are hearing to practice the sound-writing relationship. Then they'll swap over and do the same thing. And then they use their own text and they draw what they can see there. So to really draw out and make sure that they're understanding. Then we're going to write some sentences. We've given them 4 adjectives to use, and they need to describe either A or B, whichever one they want to. They're writing sentences from memory at this stage, and this is why I said I've missed out some of the slides. Obviously, we've been practicing adjectival agreement.
Hay 6 flores.
Not just in this lesson, but
Son blancas.
for many lessons.
Hay 6 calaveras.
I'll just go quickly through those. And finally, they on the bottom of this activity, they are designing and then describing their own altar. So having a personal reaction to the text and to the context. Now skip forward 4 years and we're in year 9. And at the start of this year 9 course in ENSALP, this is the sort of language that students might encounter in some learning about the same Dia de los Muertos tradition. But here there's a different linguistic focus. So we're integrating different grammar features here into the same overall context. And you'll see the notion of altar also repeats in this, but there are many differences, of course. So you might be surprised by the grammar focus on here. It says reflexive pronoun se, possessive adjective su. I've never particularly before my recent work with ENSALP thought of doing a lesson which is contrasting both of these two. But if you teach Spanish, just think for a minute how often students confuse me and me. And I saw a teacher talking about this just the other day at a conference, and she'd made a video of herself reproducing this typical mistake that students make. And the approach that was modeled there was to just practice writing out the incorrect sentence over and over again to make it stick in the memory. But I think there's, an alternative approach is to do this in planning, to identify, for us as teachers, to identify the very hard to reach grammar features up front and plan their teaching with lots of input practice where choosing the right feature of the two is absolutely essential to doing the task, so that we construct tasks so that it's impossible to do the task without thinking about the connection between the form of the word and its meaning. These sorts of tasks have shown to lead to learning in over 50 studies. That seems like enough to me to make me want to explore that as a teacher quite seriously. So here's a listening where it starts off by aural identification of su or se. So we just click and that's all we hear.
Su.
And we have to work out, then it becomes a reading task, of course, then we have to work out how that sentence can finish. And it can only finish in one of 2 ways because we are contrasting su and se. And here, of course, it needs to finish with the noun that will always follow su, whereas a verb will always follow se. I won't dwell on that one. You can go back and look at it another time. The lesson obviously carries on. And now we get a text that at first glance looks like a decent chunky year 9-esque text about the Day of the Dead. But and that's in fact what it is. And it has obviously drawing attention to pan de muerto, which is the type of bread that they traditionally eat on this day. But there's also a way of integrating this with the grammar too. So just a quick look at how many examples of su and se are in here. There are quite a lot of them. And students, first of all, work to put them back. So they need to be connecting the su and the se with the word that comes after it. So they're thinking about meaning and they're thinking about form all of the time while they're doing that. But of course, just doing that doesn't get them under the skin of what the text really, really means. So we need something a bit deeper to do that. And what we've got here is a listening activity that is chunked. So it gets to a certain point and it stops. And then students have to suggest an alternative word that could fit there and be relevant and appropriate to the context. So I'm just going to play you one bit.
México
tiene muchas tradiciones, pero su tradición del Día de Muertos es especialmente conocida. Es una costumbre única y muy importante para su.
Okay, so pupils have followed along, which is also something that's really very useful to help them over time work out where words start and stop, and supports their understanding, their segmentation of the audio stream. But we've got to su, and the next word is comunidad. So in order to suggest an alternative, pupils really need to have understood quite clearly certainly everything in that sentence leading up to that word. So even if not the first sentence, certainly all of the second sentence, they need to be understanding in order to have a decent suggestion. And of course, you know, if you're not familiar with this scheme of work, you won't have any idea which other words they would know that would be appropriate here. But if I tell you that they have learned gente, they've learned historia, and they've learned país, there are three options there that they could be drawing on in order to suggest what might come out. They've probably also learned cultura, which might work too. Okay, so the second point that I made about a lot of the words, so after I said that a lot of the words in the top 2000 do lend themselves to cultural topics and the culture will come, I said this: build out from the words and the culture will come with it. And so I was mulling over how to try and demonstrate really clearly how we can have confidence that if we do this, if we build our curriculum from a majority of high frequency words, that a wealth of cultural contexts and other relevant and communicative everyday contexts as well, to boot, is facilitated. And I suddenly had the idea, I didn't know how good it was going to be, and I still don't really know, of tracing the path of one word through a whole scheme of work to see its journey over the 3 years. Which contexts can it belong to? So with this idea that you don't choose a topic or a cultural context and assign words to it, but you choose your words and you assign your contexts, multiple contexts and multiple topics to those words. So I chose the German word tanzen, to dance. It's within the top 2000, and it seemed at first consideration to have every chance, or at least connections to some culture of some kind, and also more than one topic, because I think that's the important thing, connecting our new words in the L2 with multiple topics so that we really get this depth of vocabulary knowledge. So I thought tanzen, well, it's bound to be in some kind of context for free time activities. Maybe it will come up in the context of festivals or parties or something as well. And then I wasn't really sure what I was going to find. So I'm going to lay out now what I did find. I'm going to go quite quickly through it because it's about giving a flavor. And then I have actually pulled all of the slides out of all of the different resources to show what that actually looks like in practice. But first, just so that you can get a sense of how that word tanzen would be initially presented, practiced, revised, come back in lots of different guises, in lots of different topics, and across lots of different grammatical contexts as well. So it first appears in year 7 in week 10. That's where you can see it. It's in the context of asking questions about daily activities or activities at home. It then comes up again 3 weeks later, actually in a Christmas lesson. I'm a bit intrigued because obviously it's spaced repetition, so it comes up when it comes up, but I thought, well, I wonder how we've managed to get it into a lesson about plural nouns, but nonetheless, it told me that it was there, so I thought that's interesting. It's then revisited again in week 19, and the context is the lives and biographies of famous German-speaking celebrities. And you can see there that I also traced it into tests and could see that it was in a learning homework in week 9, a test in week 20, and a summer term test in week 32. So those are the times it's encountered. And the grammatical contexts are present tense verbs, I, you, he, she forms, and this strange one about plurals. Okay, so in year 8, we see tanzen appear as part of a larger vocabulary set. So it's together with a whole bunch of other words from year 7. The context is narrating past events. So we can imagine that we're going to see tanzen here used in the perfect tense. It's also revised, revisited in the week before, and it's in some assessments as well. It seems to be in both of the year 8 assessments. In year 9, it's in the autumn term assessment. Then it's in week 15 as part of a lesson on New Year's resolutions. And we can imagine that might see it used in the future tense. And then 6 weeks later, we see it in a lesson focused on a poem by Adel Karasholi, which is called Zail Tanz, as it happens. And Karasholi is a Syrian immigrant to Germany who studied German at university there and went on to be a poet writing poetry in German. And then in the penultimate week of year 9, so we've been through 3 years now of Key Stage 3, we see tanzen appear again in the Grimm brothers fairy tale Der Rattenfänger, which is the Pied Piper of Hamelin. Now, the instance in this text, it's actually in the source text, is just incidental. It was not down on the list of words to be revised, but it happens to be there in the text for that week, so it's a bonus. And there are doubtless many other lessons where tanzen just happens to crop up incidentally without it being part of the vocabulary sets. But just from that tracking, we can see that across Key Stage 3, this word is encountered at least 15 times in a whole range of contexts. Some of them look like they'll be cultural, some of them look like they'll just be sort of conversational, normal interactional topics. So we don't yet know what that looks like in practice. So I've pulled out the slides, as I said, just so that we can have a look at the journey of tanzen across Key Stage 3. So it is introduced very explicitly as a verb with both of its English meanings, very conscious of the fact that we have 2 meanings for the infinitive in German. We also have 2 translations for the present tense, which causes students in French and German some difficulty if we don't get there early with this one. So we constantly do activities where we're translating both ways so that we can never get to the point where we look at a photo and say, oh, ist tanzen, he is dancing. And we want to avoid that. And that needs quite a lot of attention. So first of all, we get a very explicit introduction with the word in sentences, and we cycle through that presentation. Okay, where does it go next? It goes into a listening about activities at home, as I suggested, and it appears twice in this activity. It's then also just treated as a normal vocabulary activity, and we practice it in a vocab bingo. I found it. And then we've also done quite a lot with questions. Key Stage 3 is obviously very, very important. I'll be talking about questions tomorrow, but here we're focusing on the syntax of questions in German. So do you questions involve an inversion of verb and subject? If we have the voice going up at the end, then the intonation is obviously a clue, so much of an overwhelming clue to the fact that it's a question, that pupils don't need to focus their attention on the fact that the verb and the subject have swapped places. And so here we've got the slightly random but very effective introduction of an alien who doesn't have any intonation. So here we've got du tanzt nicht gut, nicht so gut. That's a sentence. As you can see, D was a sentence, full stop at the end there. But had we heard tanzt du nicht so gut with the same intonation, we would have signaled that that was a question, because we're focusing on the place of the verb being crucial to making it a question. And we know that this is something that learners find hard. I have lots of memories of year 7, te gusta el francés. The answer comes back, te gusta, not me gusta. It's something that comes back time and time again. Tienes, da 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 da, tienes in the answer, and that is this is the sort of activity that is designed to work on that, because we've anticipated that is an issue. Okay, so obviously pupils are going to use intonation when they ask the question. So when we get to the speaking activity, we've kept wie oft the same, but they're producing the verbs from memory, and this time putting obviously the verb in the right place and intoning it properly. And here we can see tanzen again is one of those examples. By this stage in year 7, I think this might be week 19 or something. These are all of the verbs that they know. And in this particular activity, they are asked in pairs to start writing some questions that they might ask partners. They might ask a class in a German partner school. We're all obviously hoping that people have partner schools that they can do this with remotely, because otherwise those questions can of course be written, but they won't be answered. But it's a cumulative exercise where they write their own questions, they get together with a partner, they make their best selection, they join together with another group, they make their best selection. And by the end, we've got 20 questions to put in a survey to a German class. Okay, so the Christmas scenario. Now, this can be difficult when you're presented with the fact that you should be revising the verb tanzen, and yet that's one of the words that needs revisiting that week, but actually your lesson is about nouns. But helpfully, the Christmas theme helps us out here, because we've got Deck the Halls in German. And the reason we've chosen that is that our phonics focus is EI and IE, which gets about 8 visits across Key Stage 3, because it's such a tricky one for pupils. So they're doing this as a read aloud, and quite obviously they're not going to know all of the words in it. So we unpack some of the vocabulary. And as I was doing this, I was thinking, gosh, Deck the Halls. I'm not sure how many pupils would really connect that English. Even if they had known the song, they may not have reflected on what that actually means in English. So it's that old thing of getting to know a little bit about your own culture as you explore another. Here we've got obviously the bit that involves tanzen, because tretet an zum bunten Reigen. Reigen is a circle dance. I've just given a picture here and asked was ist das, thinking that pupils from the picture will think, oh right, it's something to do with dancing. They may very well say, oh, dancing, miss, because they may not come out immediately with the verb tanzen that they haven't used for 3 weeks. But of course, you then prompt them for that word, and that will help them make that link and retrieve it again. So just these small moments, quite a lot of research talks about retrieval practice, talks about spaced repetitions, talks about those connections that need making and remaking, and this is just an opportunity to do that again. Moving on, we've got a quick revision of different verbs, so that's activities, and then we've got the biography lesson. So this is written in the present tense, making liberal use of the historic present here, and the first person forms, and this was done as a running dictation. So students had four women, 4 men, some living, some dead, but all German speaking. That was the connection. And they ran to obviously read the information, came back to share it and record it. But ultimately, after various activities, what happened at the end was that they designed a listening task for each other, where they chose 5 statements they wrote 5 statements from least obvious to most obvious at the end, based on the details contained in this task. So obviously underneath it, they're working the grammar from first person to third person, but actually they're creating an activity that they then do with their class. And if they manage it well, then the rest of the students won't get the answer until maybe clue 4 or 5. So that was their motivation for that one. We can write this question by this stage. We can write it in the present tense, third person form in a question. Wer tanzt nicht? And this comes up just before an interview with Papa Schlumpf. Again, I don't know how cultural you will consider this to be, but we call it Smurfs. They call them Schlumpf. It's nice to know that they exist, but that they had to be given different names.
Interview.
Oh, I haven't got time to look at that one, but the Tanzer is there. Past tense, I'm going to rush through now. You're getting the idea. Again, lots and lots of work on questions. I've taken the animations away here, but this is a if this is the answer, what is the question? And students had to come up with the question that would have elicited that answer. And then we click and check what question they would have heard. And I've obviously in gold there, I've got the answers as they were. Lots and lots. Obviously, it comes up in assessment in various different ways, which I haven't got time to look at with you. But again, comes up in phonics, comes up in vocabulary. Here we're making links. I've taken the animations away, but you've got 3 words there. And this is about depth of vocabulary knowledge. This is about associations, not just antonyms, synonyms, but they're good too. But here we're thinking about broader categories. What connects the words zuhören, Konzert, and tanzen? And there won't just be one answer, but that was the answer I gave, which was Musik. Here we're in year 9, as you can see, we're now approaching the future tense. We've got Chinese New Year as our focus for this particular lesson. There are Chinese heritage speakers, I think around 200,000. I forget the actual number, but a sizable proportion of Chinese heritage people living in German-speaking countries. Here we're expecting students to know the verb still, to be able to write it, to be able to speak it. And here it is a suggestion in an open-ended writing task. Moving on to the poem now, which is really interesting, I think, in terms of tanzen, because here we get under the skin of the interesting thing about culture, cultural texts is that we get to different meanings of the word. So Seiltanz means tightrope walking, and we use walk and they use dance. And reflecting on that, this poem would not have worked as well, I don't think, in English. It wouldn't have given quite the same symbolism as we explore in this poem. And so here we're realizing that and recognizing that before we get going with the poem. It appears several times in the poem, the word tanzen. It's not only in the title, it also appears in the text itself and comes out through various activities. But here I think it's really nice. The visual image is good too, but just thinking about that balancing act, the symbolism of the Seiltanz is this balancing act between 2 worlds when you are an immigrant. And so students reflect on that. Really nice ideas, obviously, and then we do a little bit of translation work and look at 2 different translations. Finally, we are at the Rattenfänger, so we've journeyed now through 3 years of tanzen, and here it is sitting in the text, and this particular part of the lesson is focusing on the elements of these stories, these grim fairy tales, where they often had some serious Bestrafung, punishment, they had a moral to them, they had an outcome, and they are these short stories. That's what they were. So I knew this would be my limit for time. I've actually hidden all of the resources that go with these title slides, but I've just retained the summary to show that I could have done this whole thing all over again with totally different examples. There's just no limit to the cultural connections that can be made with phonics, with vocab, and with grammar. So here's a title slide. If you're interested in the whole of the slides, you'll get the examples from lessons that come with these titles that I'm just flashing up. But the heightened focus on language, I really do believe paves the way for culture to be in every lesson, in a small way, sometimes in a big way at other times. But language brings culture with it. It's just up to us as teachers to spot those connections, to make them live. And for some of this, it probably broadens what we think of as culture, which I think is no bad thing. So I hope there's been something of interest in there for you in this presentation. If you would like to get all of the slides, including all of the hidden ones, please head to the NSAT website for everything secondary related there. If you are a primary teacher and you're interested in exploring my Trust primary resources and using them, then just go to rachelhawkes.com and navigate your way from the homepage. Resources are going up throughout the year. We're keeping pace with teaching. We're about 2 weeks ahead at the moment, and it's crazy, but we are committed to doing that because there are lots of schools already using the material. So once again, thank you for listening. I'm going to have a quick look. My timer says 50 minutes, but I can't actually see what the time's. Oh, I think I might have 5 minutes. Okay, so I'm going to have a quick look at questions, and I'm going to rely on Jonathan to cut me off dead when I've used up my time. So where can we find the Key Stage 2 resources? Okay, so that there on the bottom right of the screen that you can see, we've got rachelhawks.com. If you go there, there are new schemes of work and the existing schemes of work that were on there. If you look for ones that are called after colours, rouge, jaune, vert, what is the colour for blue? Oh, bleu. Those are the French 4 years, and they are written in bands. So rouge and jaune are interchangeable 3-4, years 3-4. And there's a reason for that, which I explain on the website. And then bleu and vert are interchangeable 5-6. And that's why at the moment we've gone for rouge all the way through and bleu all the way through, and jaune and vert are taking a bit of a backseat, because we know that we can have those ready for next September. And actually, if you want to go on my primary mailing list, you will get sort of updates when things go up. I don't send out very many emails, I haven't got time, but it also means that if you wanted to be involved in a very exciting primary research project that's being run by Rowena Kasprovic from the University of Reading to evaluate primary learning using the scheme, then please do just get in touch and email me and say that you want to go on the list, and that will keep you informed. Final question, I think. Oh, how do we get hold of the recording? I don't know anything about that, but it must be on the website. It must be clearly signposted on the website. I think it's going to be about 24 hours after the session finishes, and you'll get an automated email, but I don't know that for sure. But obviously it takes a while for the processing to chug it all through. We've been asked to develop a love of German culture through the provision of reading and library books. Do you have any tips? That's a good question. I have in the back of my head an answer to that. I really think there's room, and if there are any publishers out there listening, I think there's room for a set of readers actually that I know we've had readers before and we used to have them. I think it's time for a big revamp. I think there's time for sort of prioritizing the high frequency words, but nevertheless having really, really interesting cultural content come to the fore. We've done lots of bits of culture in our lessons, but it would be really nice to have a set of graded readers, I think. I don't really have any good tips except for using, what I would say is, if you've got creative people in your department, I would use the word profile, the word profiler that MSELP has developed, because you can check the difficulty of your text within that. You can paste a text in and edit it within the profiler in order to sort of make it appropriate for your learners and what they already know. Can we find any ready-made files with cultural songs, texts in French or others? Well, we're adding, I would say yes to that. Oh, hi, Sophie. I would say yes to that. Just what occurs to me just off the top of my head in a rush is I would go to YouTube and look for Marie-Odile Guillou, because she's made some really nice poems that she reads aloud. She's written them. They focus phonetically. You'll get which sounds they're focusing on, but she's got other associated resources as well. They're not all phonics. We include the phonics ones in our French schemes of work, and we include songs that are relevant within the French schemes of work as well. Yes, and if you're talking about secondary, there are some great cultural text song lessons within the schemes of work. If you download the scheme of work and then just find where those lessons are, they're about once a half term, once per term. And that's it, because I think other people are just answering each other's questions, I think. So unless there's anything else, I should probably let you go and get ready for the next session if you're here for the whole day. So once again, I hope there's been something of interest there for you. Thank you for listening, and yeah, I'm going to assume that everybody knew not to put questions to me in the chat, because there's quite a lot of chat comments, but I'm assuming that people knew to put those into the Q&A rather than anything else, because I think we're running out of time. Oh, Claire, do you have any assessment for primary? Yeah, that's next weekend's job. So it will be coming. There will be termly assessment. So if you look at what's there at the moment for the primary, weeks 13 and 14 are not there. In fact, week 12 hasn't gone up yet either, but weeks 13 and 14 on our scheme of work will include some assessment, quite low key, and actually with a Christmas theme as well. But yes, there are assessments that are going to assess the content of the scheme of work up to that point, and they're going to be quite carefully constructed as well. But there will be vocabulary, grammar and phonics assessments going with each term of the scheme of work, and they'll always be within the last 2 weeks, but allowing people to do them, and they won't be long. We are talking a sort of 20-minute assessment, but the phonics one will obviously take a little bit longer because pupils will need to do that individually, which is why we're going to give Christmas activities for pupils to be doing while teachers go around and check. Okay, thank you for that question.
Rachel, could I, sorry to interrupt, could I wind you up a bit?
Of course you can. I'm finished. I don't know whether you were listening, Jonathan, but I'm proud of myself this time, because I managed to answer the questions.
Brilliant.
I've answered all the questions, and we're ready to call it a day now. So thanks very much.
Well, Rachel, thank you so much for today. It was absolutely wonderful, and for giving up your time.
No problem. Okay, bye.
Cheerio.